So I'm going to split this evening's chat into some background information about Kibbutz and Gev, and then a diary. I'm going to read parts of a diary that were written by people who lived in Engev and did not sign their name in the old days, because the book that came out on Engev, Engev in War is how they called it. In the old days, you didn't necessarily sign what you wrote. So there's a lot of anonymous things there, and go figure who wrote it. But sometimes you can try to figure it out, but it's not that important. So I don't necessarily have a source for the diary because it doesn't say who wrote it. And then we'll meet the commander of the actual attack on Susita. His name is Mayor Kajinski. And when I first came to Nov, they invited him here to tell the story of Susita and Engev in general on Memorial Day. And they asked me to go down and pick him up, which I was, of course, incredibly excited to do. So, and we drove up the road that goes right by Susita. And of course, I tried to get all the information I could from him, since he's unfortunately passed away. But he left a lot of interesting, he wrote a lot. He actually wrote a book that I'm still trying to get my hands on. But he wrote in the book that's been reprinted a number of times. So we'll hear his story about how he didn't even want to do this, and his kind of arm was twisted, as it were. And then we'll hear from some of the people who lived at Engev, including one fascinating woman whose name is Claire Epstein. They became a very important archaeologist. And then we'll try to sum up what are the things that we can learn from the story. So let's start with some pictures. There we go. This is an old picture from the 1930s, late 1930s, of Kibbutz Engev and Susita. Now, that mountain is what we call Susita, and there's not a lot of room, if you look at the picture, between the mountain and the water. So the kibbutz is in between. And in the beginning, which was in 1937, it was livable. In fact, people used to not only go up to Susita, people used to go all the way into the Golan, and even to Damascus, a few people went. But things started getting bad in 1948, and it became impossible. So this picture is a very good picture, even though it's very old. You can see the boat in the foreground, a few buildings, some trees, and then that's it. The fence of the kibbutz is the fence of the, I guess you could say, the mandates, or not really where the mandate was, but where the Syrians were sitting. Syrians were sitting on top of Susita in 1948, and it became dangerous. So the beginnings of the kibbutz are in 1937, and just to put things into the frame of what was going on at the time, the riots of 1936 to 1939 were going on. Murders were not uncommon at all. The Jewish presence in the land felt that the British weren't doing enough. The Arab presence in the land felt that the British weren't doing enough. And one of the things that was forbidden, of course, was to start a new village. However, there was a famous loophole that if you were able to construct a tower and a wall around your village before the British got there, then they wouldn't take it down. So about 50 villages, most of them kibbutzim, not all, were set up by this idea of, officially it was called tower and stockade, but today, I don't know if people know what a stockade is. Sounds like something from the Wild West. But in Hebrew, it's choma migdal, which is really wall and tower. You know, kol hakavod to whatever Jewish lawyer figured out that there was that loophole. And here are the people of Engev in 1937 are putting up the tower. And afterwards, they put up the wall. You can see how they made the wall here. this was standard back in those days. You bring in a lot of wood, and you have 2 layers here, and in the middle is gravel. And once you have that, you're fine. So the British can't take it down, and also you can't shoot through it because there's gravel in the way. The people of Engev, of course, not having a lot of fields, planned also to be fishermen because they were right on the Kinneret. And here they are in the very beginning, even before they finished, building the wall up. They already were drying out the nets on the wall. It was perfect for drying out nets. So it started in 1937, and the reason that they went there has to do, I think, from what I have read and the people I talked to, was that there was this yearning for the pioneers in the 20s, 30s, and 40s to go to the Golan, and especially to the place that today is in Syria. We would call it the Syrian Golan. Others would call it the Choran. And Baron Rothschild bought tens of thousands of dunam there to be tilled and lived in by Jews, but it never really happened. There were a lot of attempts, and it was always a dream. And Manya Shochad, who we talked about a few weeks ago, was like a dream of hers, and it's still actually legally owned by Baron Rothschild, but that doesn't really help us any. And so a lot of times there were poems like Rachel, the poetess, wrote about over there are the mountains of the Golan, and there was this yearning to go up there and till it and make villages. And the bridge to get there would be Engev, because they're right at the foot of the Golan. Before that, there were no Jewish villages on the eastern side of the Kinneret. The western side, of course, had Tiberias, which had been there for a long time, a few thousand years. And there were other kibbutzim there. But on the eastern side, Engev was totally alone. So it started out, and it was tough. And one of the things that people did was get rocks out of the fields. Of course, we have a special word in Hebrew for getting rocks out of fields. Why can't we have one word in English? Because you have to take the rocks and get them out of the field. But in Hebrew, we have a special word, sikul, exactly for taking rocks out of fields, because that's what you got to do in this country. And here you can see them. Susita is not visible here, it'd be on the left, but they're starting out very primitive. They don't have a lot. And they were kids, really, who started the kibbutz and came from Germany. They were all in Zionist youth groups in Germany and Czechoslovakia and from the Baltic countries. Here is a picture from the early 1940s. And you can see these are kids. These are the founders of the kibbutz who've been there for a few years. And why are they so happy? Because they planted a tree. Today, if I would show this to a kid, say, what's the deal? But, planting a tree, especially here, especially in the 1940s, when we know what was going on in the world, this is a huge thing. This was a reason to dance. So life was livable, even though, again, from 36 to 39, it was tough to be in Israel. But aside from the sadness of what was going on in Europe, there was a lot of building, and everything was fine until 1948. Now, this is a drawing, which I think is fascinating, because this is a drawing from 1948. And look at how they drew Susita. Susita is looming over, much more than it is in actuality, over the kibbutz. And the mountains on the right, which are the mountains of the Golan and where kibbutz Kfar Haruf is today, that's not that, that's a little exaggerated, but I think it really kind of shows us how the people of Engev felt. Because once Israel declared its independence, life became almost unbearable, because for obvious reasons, even from the mountain on the right, you can shoot down at Engev, and they did, and the mountains on the left. But here, they are able to see exactly where they're shooting down. They can actually have snipers shoot specifically at people who are running back and forth. and life became miserable, and they had to dig trenches. They had already started beforehand. They knew, they had a feeling something like this was going to happen, and they started working a lot in mining the fields around them, fixing the fence and making posts and getting people ready to defend. So I think this picture kind of shows psychologically how this mountain loomed over them and was a huge threat to their daily lives. These are other pictures that you can see. It's not, okay, it does loom over the kibbutz, but now you can see in reality how the picture is exaggerated, and I think it speaks volumes about their feeling. These are modern pictures. You can see the mountains of the Golan and back, and they were shooting from there too, but you can see they did have a few fields below Susita, but those were very, very hard to till. Starting in 1948, you couldn't really go outside of the kibbutz and get there without being shot at during the day. Another picture in the summer. Before that was in the winter. This is in the summer. They dug trenches. This is actually the trenches of the kibbutz, and men and women. Most of them didn't work in their usual jobs. They had to stop. Most people stopped working and started not only help defend the place, but actually build the bunkers and put the sandbags, et cetera, and make the place more defendable. This is the man, Mayor Kajinski. He was actually not in the kibbutz when all this started. He was in the army, as most of the young men in the kibbutz were taken and drafted to fight the War of Independence. So who were the people who were defending the kibbutz? They were people who were older, people who maybe who weren't drafted, had not been in the army, did not have training, and they were in the trenches. So they were definitely soldiers. Every single person in Engev had a part in defending in some way the village. And it's interesting also that as soon as May came around, the middle of May in 1948, they actually put Engev under siege from 3 directions: from east, from north, from south, and the only way out was by boat. Now, there were a lot of places under siege, right? Jerusalem was under siege, Gush Etzion was under siege, a lot of places in the Negev. But this was different because they had a way out, but it was by boat. And also, at some point, they decided to, when things got really bad, to move the children, and some of the mothers, not all of them, but some of the mothers were moved to Kibbutz Alunim towards Haifa until the battle was over. And that's kind of like a little bit of background of what led up to what was going on here. And then in June, a terrible, terrible battle happened, and Syria attacked. This was the only village in all of Israel that was attacked by planes, cannons, tanks, and infantry, and withstood it all in this little tiny strip of land, which is an incredible story in itself. And one day, the Syrians were actually able to break in the perimeter fence and get to one of the posts known as the pillbox, and they captured it, but they were pushed back and repelled afterwards. But in that battle, 5 people died from the kibbutz, including key members and leaders of the kibbutz. It was a terrible tragedy. One other man died in another, he was actually drafted and he fell in central Israel. And 6 people pretty much in one day fell, which is a huge blow to the kibbutz. And now I just want to read a few things that were written by an anonymous man in the diary that he wrote. June 9th, 1948. The short 10-day ceasefire ended today. We moved all the kitchen utensils back into the bunkers. July 10th. It was quiet until noontime, and then the Syrians shot the cannon at us for the first time since the ceasefire. They shot only 5 shells trying to hit the tractor that was working near the bunker. The driver from a neighboring kibbutz was lightly wounded by shrapnel. They also shot small arms fires from Susita at the guys putting down mines. They had to stop working, but nobody was hurt, and we didn't return fire. July 11th. Today marks the 30th Memorial Month for our 5 members who fell in the big attack. At 11 p.m., we held a memorial service near the Chadar Ochel, the dining room. Everybody showed up except for those guarding. It was a short ceremony, and one speaker said, "Nothing symbolizes the cruelty of war more than this very ceremony held in the middle of the night under cover of darkness." And then on July 14th, they noticed a constant stream of people coming down to Susita from Syria with equipment, some carrying it by hand, some with donkeys. They're making new posts and bunkers. We could see it all clearly, and this upset a lot of us members who went to the headquarters and demanded that we shoot at them. And headquarters refused our request for their own reasons, but before evening, they apparently gave in to our demands, and we shot bullets and mortar shells at the soldiers building the posts. They ran back towards Syria, but then the cannon shot 14 shells at us. Then it was quiet again. July 15th. In the morning, no movement. We thought it was because our shooting had stopped them, but in the afternoon, a big convoy of people began streaming down again with equipment towards Susita. We asked headquarters for permission to open fire, but this time we were refused. The commander came and explained that we can't stop them from building and that they can do much more damage to us than we can do to them. And then something historic happened. One guy just started talking and said, "It's obvious that there are only a few enemy troops on Susita. Perhaps we should go one step further and get a force together and go up and capture the mountain." That was it. That one man, who I don't know who it is, just said it out loud. And everybody just stopped talking. And everybody thought that was a great idea. And the local commander made a list of people who might be able to be part of such a force. And he made a general plan. And he went to the regional commander headquarters to get the okay. And they started training the people who were on that list. The regional headquarters the next day sent a telegram. "Can you go tonight?" It's like they didn't come up with the idea, but the problem was that on a whole other front with the Syrians, especially in a village on the northern part of the Kinneret called Mishmar Yarden, the Syrians were making a lot of advances, very threatening this area, and had a bridgehead there. And what the IDF wanted to do was to draw as many Syrian forces away from there, and therefore the idea of taking Susita fit perfectly with this idea. And so they said, "Can you go tonight?" But we told them we weren't able to do so because we still have to train. So these were people who were not in shape, okay? They'd never fought before. So they got from regional headquarters 13 other farmers from other farms in the Jordan Valley who came with a heavy machine gun and 4 donkeys. Because how are they going to schlep all the stuff that they need up to the top of the mountain? So they had donkeys. Unbelievable. So we weren't even close to be ready. Instead, we sent 2 groups of 2 scouts to check out the ascents, plural of ascent, before the whole force was to do it. And the attack commander, Mayer, who we see here, sent everybody to get a good night's sleep. There was a lot of tension there because the headquarters wanted them to fight that night, but they decided that they couldn't do it. And interestingly enough, there was something else that was happening now. In 2 days, the second ceasefire was going to start. And there was a fear that if they didn't take Susita now, they would never take it. So let's move on to the next part, which is Mayer himself is talking about his feelings about taking this mountain. To put it lightly, he wasn't too crazy about doing it. And throughout the battle, before the battle, during the battle, and even after the battle, he's not sure if it's the wisest thing to do, because a few things could happen and the entire force would be wiped out. So in general, just as far as numbers go, originally they started out with about 40 people. And what he did was he started training and seeing if people could, one, could they walk quietly at night? Two, could they carry a lot of equipment? And most of the people were not in shape for that. Even the people who were in shape beforehand, for months now, they've been sitting static in their posts, not doing anything, defending the kibbutz. They had to do it, but they were totally out of shape. And some of the people had never done it before. The average age of the people doing this was actually mid-30s. But these were not necessarily people who had actually been in the army before. And the people who came from the other kibbutzim were young, but they were very young. And almost no one who was on this attack had ever actually been fired at. So moving on to Mayor Kajinski, he says as follows. I'll just read parts of it. I have to admit, in the hours leading up to the attack on Susita, I was plagued with doubt. I had been in a number of battles and only recently returned to the kibbutz for a while. I'd led men into battle a number of times, but these people were my neighbors. Many were the kibbutz founders, and I was the youngest of them all, and I have to lead them? Another thing that bothered me was that from the beginning, I was all for this plan to take Susita. After all, the idea came from us, the members of Engev. But when I took a look at the people who were to be on this force, when I saw in what shape they were in, when I took a cold, hard look at it all, I thought this plan to be ridiculous. But then I went back and weighed the pros and cons again, and then I thought the plan was totally insane. Some things you just can't make happen by sheer willpower. I knew what a superhuman effort was needed in order for this to work out successfully. These people were not able to complete this mission with all their goodwill and motivation. They're not in shape, they're not professional, they have no experience walking quietly at night under heavy weight, not to mention capturing a mountain while getting shot at, and they've never been in battle before. For 48 hours before the attack, we trained. This might have been a mistake because now I knew, actually we all knew, how unprepared we were. He's not trying to be funny, although it's kind of humorous, only because we know the ending. The ending is good. I really would have wanted to train for at least a few more days before attacking, but in the end, because of other military actions on the Syrian front, we had to leave sooner rather than later. Another factor was the fact that the ceasefire was about to begin a day later, and if we were going to do this, we had to do it now. The time had come. Night fell. We gathered the force near the Harocha. The local commander asked to say a few words to the unit. He said, "We have been successful in repelling all of the attacks against us. We will succeed in this mission too." He spoke with much self-confidence. Perhaps some people were convinced by his words. I was not. So this man has a lot of doubts, and he's leading the force, okay? We left the gates of the kibbutz. We crossed some fields full of thorns. Our adrenaline was flowing. We began our climb. No noise was made. Only once, when we were almost at the top, did someone roll a stone down the hill. So we stood still silently. Could they hear us? We listened carefully. Nothing. We kept ascending. We climbed carefully for another hour until we were under a very steep part of the hill, and here we rested. The next part would be the hardest and would take over an hour, even though it was just a few hundred meters. We reached the next stop and waited for the moon to set. At about 1 a.m., the moon was supposed to set, so I took the time, went back and forth to check up on each and every person. I saw people were tired. They were breathing heavily, but nobody made a sound. I still had my doubts about this entire attack. And I saw this man, head of one of the kibbutz branches, and I saw that man who was the father of 2 kids. And I, the youngest of them all, had to command them and make decisions of life and death. But along with their fatigue, I noticed something else. In their eyes was serious resolve. They knew what they were up against. They knew the price that they might have to pay, even if this mission was above their capabilities. I realized that these were serious, responsible people and that I could count on them. I returned to the front of the line with a renewed sense of resolve. So Meir, on his own, was, even while this was happening, wasn't sure this was a good idea, but it was the people who pushed him forward to do this, which is incredible when you think about it. The moon sank. We continued. I passed back the message by whisper. Get ready. 6 people, team 1, went up to set up a vantage point on the side before we were supposed to charge. Suddenly we heard shooting. They found us. They saw us. Bullets started whizzing past our heads. We hit the dirt, which is a very human instinct. I could see fear in our people's eyes. The enemy had discovered us even before we had to cross the narrow entrance path to Susita. Our worst fears had begun to materialize. And then he's plagued again by the question, does he charge? Which he wanted to do quietly by surprise. But now they can see him, and he thinks that there's scores of soldiers looking at him, and they could all get killed because they have to run in a line because there's valleys on both sides. Or does he go back and save people's lives? Incredible amount of responsibility on this man's shoulders. I was thinking about it. Should I continue his plan? Should I turn back? One heavy machine gun placed at the entrance to the mountain, and we could all get killed. But I figured if we've made it all the way here, we're not turning back. I yelled, Team 1, open fire. The rest of you follow me. We ran on the narrow entrance path to Susita. But as we got closer to the basalt walls of the mountain, we slowed down because it looked like we were being shot at from all over the place. Then I figured it out. These were ricochets from our own bullets as they hit the rocks. I explained this to all of them, and we continued. Within a short time, we were up on top of the mountain. I left a small unit at the entrance in case the Syrians would mount a counterattack. Once we were on top of the mountain, we felt so much more sure of ourselves. But now we had to take care of the dug-in enemy. We formed a line and started charging forwards towards the west, shooting from our hips and also shooting the Piat, the anti-tank mortar, which made a huge effect. The man next to me, my deputy, wanted to get the people psyched up. So he yelled the only battle cry he knew, which was not remember the Alamo, but rather in Russian, Za Rodinu, za Ben-Guriona, za Rodinu, za Stalina, which means for the motherland, for Ben-Gurion, for the motherland, for Stalin. That's what he knew what to yell. And it worked. Soon we were at the edge of the mountain. We could see the Kinneret. There were no Syrians on Susita. As we had charged, they had all ran away. We had been ready for hand-to-hand combat, and we even threw some grenades into the trenches, but the entire mountain was empty. The signal man went to the edge of the mountain and signaled down by light to the kibbutz. Susita is in our hands. In Engev, everybody had been on edge, hearing all the shooting and all the explosions, and when they got the message from the signaler, they all cheered and threw their hats up into the air. We had left the kibbutz at 10:10 p.m. We'd signaled down at 1:20 a.m. And they asked, any casualties? We answered, no casualties. The enemy ran away. They had immediately sent the reinforcements with equipment, food, and water. An incredible story, which could have ended totally differently. And actually, nobody was hurt. Actually, on either side, there were absolutely no casualties when they took the mountain of Susita. And when looking back at why it happened, the following was written. How did we succeed without even one casualty? 3 factors. Number 1, we came from an unexpected direction. They came from the Syrian side. They didn't climb up the mountain from the Engev side. And at an unexpected time, late at night. That part I didn't understand, because don't you always attack late at night? Number 2, we charged quickly. Number 3, we fooled them into thinking we were a big force thanks to our constant shooting from the hip and thanks to the anti-tank shells. So they capture the top of the mountain, and now what's the big fear? There's going to be a counterattack. Now they only have a few men, and they realized how huge Susita is. Mayor says, I saw a place that I'd been there before the war, and I thought it was a small place, but now I realize it's about 600 meters from east to west and 200 meters wide, and we only have a few people. And they've just given everything that they could have. If the Syrians counterattack, we are in deep trouble. And so he does the following. This is actually almost as surprising as the attack itself. He signals down to the area commander and says, the fortress area is too big to hold with so few people. I suggest abandoning the area. Like, can you believe that? After all this that happened, and he was pushed by the people, he wanted to leave. And it's not because he was a scaredy cat or lost his will. He felt the responsibility for these people's lives, and he felt that if these people were to be killed, there would not be another kibbutz en Gev, because it would be the end of it. And so out of responsibility, of course, we, knowing the end, are like, what? How can that possibly be? So he signals down this message to the area commander, and the area commander signals back up to him, hold on to that mountain at all costs. Arrange for perimeter defense and dig in. He went to the eastern side for the people who would be the folks who would be attacked if the Syrians would have a counterattack. And the Syrians were shooting, and they shot mortars at them. And he asked them, are you guys okay? Do you think we should leave? And they said, no way, we're not leaving, we're staying. And so again, the people pushed Meir to stay on the mountain. That in itself is very, very powerful story. And that's Meir, who did the impossible. So that night, 16 people came up, including some women who were in the reinforcements, and they brought up food, equipment, and water. Here we can see the next day, they already had started taking pictures, and they're putting, it was a heat wave the next day, a very, very hot day. And here they're arranging the easternmost, the most dangerous, as it were, post on the eastern side in case there would be a Syrian counterattack. And these are the convoys that are coming up constantly, mainly with water, but also food supplies. They set up a wire so that they could actually use a telephone after a while. And here, this is actually a few days later because everybody's smiling here. They're not even looking to see if they're going to get shot at. It's you can see it's summer, it's hot. Why isn't this guy wearing a hat? Good question. And they're climbing to bring stuff up to En Gev. At this point, by the way, there's a mule here that they also brought, excuse me, there's a donkey here, but they also brought in mules. And this is a picture also taken, they actually set up a tent there, and this was taken by the people of En Gev. And you would think that the army would say, guys, you did a great job. Thank you so much. We'll take it from here. No, for an entire year, the kibbutz not only held the place, but made it better, fed the people who were up there, and those people were kibbutz members who had to build their destroyed kibbutz from getting shelled and shot at by the Syrians, and now they got to go up and do guard work. So it was a huge, huge effort on part. In other words, taking it is only part of the work. Then you got to keep it. So this is Claire Epstein. There's a number of famous people celebrities who were there. Teddy Kullak was one of the founding members, and other famous people there. But this woman is perhaps, her story is really telling because she was specifically moved by Susita, and it changed her life. And her name's Claire Epstein. She was born in London, and her mother was active saving Jews from the Nazis during the Holocaust. At a young age, she was an active Zionist. She learned Hebrew at an early age. She went to university, studied Italian, got her bachelor's degree, and made Aliyah, moved to Tel Aviv. Almost immediately after she got to Israel, she was brought quickly to Dov Oz, who was one of the leaders of the Yishuv, and she was asked to use her knowledge of English to prepare documents to be presented to the Peel Commission, the British Commission, who wanted to make a decision on what would happen with the conflict that was going on in Palestine at the time. So ever since, she was kind of like in the know. And during World War II, she served in ATS, which is an acronym that's usually pronounced as an acronym, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which is the women's branch of the British Army. She was the first woman sergeant major from the Yishuv. So it's a tough cookie, sergeant major. When she was discharged from the army, she looked for a kibbutz, had a socialist look at the world, and she chose En-Gev because she loved the way that the people there were enjoyed culture and music. So it wasn't all work for her. She also wanted the cultural part. And she was one of the guards who, after the place was taken, went up to the top of Susita and relieved the people who were there. And it was then that she became interested by all the relics that were at Susita, and archaeology became the love of her life. Now there was a split, an ideological split in the 1950s. We won't go into it, but a political split, so that the kibbutz movement kind of split in two, and she left En-Gev with a number of other people and went to live in Ginosar, exactly on the other side of the Kinneret. And Yigal Yadin, the famous archaeologist, went to dig Chatzor in 1952, and as he passed by Ginosar, he was apparently a well-known lover of grapes. I mean, who isn't? And he went to the kibbutz vineyard that he heard about, and that's where Claire worked. And he said, "Do you have any grapes?" And she said, "Yeah, here's a whole cluster of Muscat grapes." And she said, "I heard you're digging at Chatzor, and I love, I'm very orderly, and I want to be part of the dig." And he said, "You got it." So thanks to a cluster of Muscat grapes, she actually was one of the diggers, or on the staff of the dig of Yadin at Chatzor. In 1952, she was one of the people who discovered and dug up the huge Canaanite temple. The same year, by the way, she adopted a boy from Iraq whose parents were killed in a pogrom against the Jews there. And a few years later, she went back to England and got her PhD in archaeology, came back to Israel, and after the Six-Day War, was one of the two leaders of the emergency archaeological survey of the Golan Heights. And while she was here they found thousands of things in the Golan Heights and wrote down everything and took pictures. One of the things that she was most interested in were the dolmens, which are the huge ancient table-like grave sites from 5,000 years ago. She said, "This is my thing." And she was considered the greatest expert of all time of what happened 5,000 years ago in the Golan. She wrote a book in English about the subject, and a monumental work. It's still being used today. She didn't have a driver's license. So how did she get to the Golan? She hitchhiked. She was a very humble person. And a lot of the Druze who were then in the Golan she was friendly with them all. And she was scrambling around the stones of the Golan almost until she passed away. She got the highest prize for civilians in Israel, the Israel Prize, for her life work in 1995. And she also was one of the people who helped in identifying the boat that was a 2,000-year-old boat that was found at the kibbutz at Ginosar. She fell in the year 2000, had to go to Hadassah Hospital for some treatment. Complications arose, and she passed away very quickly afterwards at her home in Ginosar. She writes about how her time at Susita affected her. And I wanted to read a few excerpts from what she writes in an article in the book that is called "When a Kibbutz Holds a Fort." When the kibbutz members captured Susita, we were so excited. The incredible view from above did its magic. During the day, it was so beautiful, and at night, with the moon above, the shadows of the clouds, especially in winter, dance on the hills and on the water. These all captured our hearts as we sat above. We felt freedom. We gained emotional space from the quietude and the open horizon. She writes like a poet, really. But as time marched on, when your third and fourth turn came up to go up and do guard work on top of the mountain, people began to complain that they couldn't be at work. And why should the kibbutz and not the army have to maintain the fort? We're trying to still build back our destroyed kibbutz. But secretly, I think everybody was happy to go up and do Toranut for 3 or 4 days at a time, especially the women. I noticed at times that there was a silent attempt by some to be in the next round of guarding. Just like we made a difference in the trenches, we made a difference on the mountain too, especially the women of the kibbutz, and life was simply more exciting and enjoyable when we were all together on top of the mountain. At first, the conditions were primitive. We lived in caves, and little by little, we made life better there. We had visits from journalists, UN officials. Later, they actually drew the line between the two countries, and Susita was part of the state of Israel, thanks to these people. All in all, as time passed, we made Susita feel like home, and people who had done many tours up there were called Susita veterans. Moving on, she says, we used to ascend by foot. At first, there were donkeys who were stubborn, and then we brought in more professional mules, and then we started paving a dirt road, and the jeeps in the inn came up and brought us our supplies. And in the beginning, we used to use white undershirts to signal during the day. Afterwards, we had a wire-connected landline phone. And finally, we didn't have to schlep anymore. The people of En-Gev were always attracted to the antiquities on the mountain, even before 1948. They were monumental and very impressive. Famous archaeologists also came to visit. But all this could happen thanks to the kibbutzniks who held the fort and maintained it. The kibbutz members began to know Susita so well. We found towers, buildings, pottery, coins, and we invited archaeologists to come visit and teach us about what they saw in the ancient city. We found a huge church, marble walls that surrounded the altar. We found mosaic floors, and archaeology itself was a big winner in this story, and not just Israel. And then she finishes by saying the following. A number of times I felt, while standing up on top of Susita and walking along around the ancient city, a certain sadness that such a beautiful city was lying in ruins. The cries of the night owls would make me shiver, and yet we all felt a certain continuity that existed between us, the members of Kibbutz En-Gev, who some believe live at the ancient lower Susita on the lake, and the members of upper Susita, many of whom also happen to be Jewish. The beauty, the quietude, and the connection to the historical past all played a part in making up this special atmosphere that existed here as we sat there, both as soldiers and as farm members, holding on to the ancient ruins of Susita. This changed her life. She became a world-class archaeologist. That's pretty interesting. I wanted to finish with some of the things that happened afterwards, and some of the traditions that actually take place at En-Gev. And we'll finish with that. In that terrible day in June of the huge attack, when they broke in and got the pillbox and 5 people were killed, one of them was a woman whose name was Hannah Tuchman Edelstein. And she stayed. She had 2 children who went to Alonim, and she was pregnant, but she stayed because she had a lot of training in defense, and she was killed during that terrible day. She was one of the 5 people who was killed. The story of that is that she was so reliable that they named her, that they had her be a commander of one of the perimeter posts. And it was on the 2nd floor of a building. And on the day that the Arab forces broke into the fence and took the pillbox post, to prevent the defenders from coming to the aid of the pillbox, the Syrians shelled the post nearby, and only then did Hannah come down from the 2nd story. When she heard an incoming shell, she jumped into the adjacent trench. The shell hit near her. The second one fell right next to her, killing her instantly. Of all the thousands of shells fired at En-Gev during the war, this was the only one ever to hit a trench. And in the 1950s, a Jewish sculptor named Hannah Orloff, also a Hannah, she made a number of interesting sculptures in Israel, and she came to En-Gev, and she wanted to pay homage to strong Israeli women. That's what she said, who helped defend the country a few years ago in the War of Independence, and she made this sculpture called Ha'em V'Hayeled, the mother and the child, based on this picture of Hannah before she died, holding up one of her children. And here you can see Hannah Orloff actually making the sculpture. And I remember my parents, who went from Kansas to Israel in the 60s, went to see this thing. It was a thing. people went to see this because it was moving, and they'd hear the story of Hannah and Hannah, and it was a very moving thing. Interestingly enough, 10 years after the War of Independence, Israel came out with a medallion for 10 years of independence. And on one part of it, on the right-hand side, with chains around it, they have the famous Judea-Capta coin that the Romans put out after destroying the Jewish state, as it were, and the temple in Jerusalem in the Great Revolt in 70. And they have, as a picture of their taking over Judea, a Roman soldier with his, foot on his helmet, and underneath a palm tree, a poor Jewish woman is in mourning. And here on the left, after 10 years of independence, the designer wanted to show the other side of the coin, calling it Israel Liberata, trying to use the Roman, the Latin, to give the other side of the coin. And they have a picture of a pioneer, a kibbutznik with the kovatembel, planting a tree, and the same picture, this is not a coincidence, it was taken from the sculpture of Hannah holding up her baby, which was then made into into the sculpture. And until this day, there is a tradition at the kibbutz that every year, all the new babies who were born that year are taken on stage by their mothers, any who agree to do this, and they do a little dance, and they hold their babies up in the air. You can see on the left, apparently, maybe they just ate, they didn't want to really do that, whatever, but this is really powerful. I mean, it's cute, of course, but like, wow, this is a tradition that's been going on since then. Now, it's not even a kibbutz anymore, it's been privatized, but this tradition continues. It's a very, very powerful message, in my opinion. And the other tradition that still happens today at En Gev is every bar and bat mitzvah class since 1953 goes up on their own without any adults with them to the top of Susita on their own using what's called the snake path, which is the serpentine-like path that they made that we saw in one of the first pictures that goes up on the En Gev side of the mountain. There is obviously someone up on top because in 1953, this was a few hundred yards from Syria. So there was someone there, but they had to get up on their own. And when they got up on top, they had to signal with a flashlight, just like the first folks did in 1948. And guess who started that tradition? Mayor Kajinski, who realized, even though back then in 48, he had his doubts, he understood educationally, this was a very important thing. And here there's a picture that I found after searching of Mayor. He was in charge of defense at the time of the kibbutz. You can see he has his gun with him. He meets the kids up on top. The kids don't all look so excited, but from what I understand, kibbutz people, especially kids, don't always want to show that they're excited, even though they might be inside. And this is the person perhaps who's in charge, their counselor. And Mayor here is trying to explain to them what just happened. They're still climbing Susita as a matter of resolve. And so I wanted to finish by talking just about a few things that we can learn from the Susita story, and feel free to add if you'd like to, or detract. So there's bad chutzpah and there's good chutzpah, right? Bad chutzpah is when you dare to badmouth your parents and tell them how they should act. I don't know if I'm saying that as a former kid or as a parent today, even though they created you, right? The good chutzpah is when you dare to do the impossible and find that you can do even superhuman acts that can make the world a better place. Mayor Kajinski, so the Susita story is a classic example of good chutzpah, okay, that we can educate with. Mayor Kajinski, the commander of the attack, wrote in his diary before the battle that sheer willpower is not enough to win a battle. But when the force reached the mountain, he was surprised by their resolve. Perhaps there are times that, yes, sheer willpower can win battles. Also, the Syrians had an option to retreat. It was just a tactical move, not a strategic one. They'd still be able to shoot and shell the valley below, even without Susita. And that's exactly what they did for 19 years until the Six-Day War. So while it might have been embarrassing to the Syrians to lose Susita, it was no big tragedy. But for the defenders of En-Gev, the mere thought of living indefinitely with an army shooting down their throats and seeing their every move from above in constant sniper fire, that was too much, inconceivable. It was literally a matter of life and death. And in the battle of willpower, the citizens of En-Gev were indefinitely stronger than the Syrian soldiers. Before, during, and after the battle, Mayor Kajinski was unsure of what to do. Continue, turn back. He decided to continue after seeing the resolve in the eyes of his fellow kibbutznikim and after getting an order from his commanding officer. Sometimes it is the people's will that makes things happen. It was from the people that the idea originated to take the Susita. It was from the people that the resolve originated. It fits the kibbutz ideal, it fits the startup nation of Israel, and it fits the Jewish tradition of people inspiring their leaders to take action. Like in biblical times, for instance, one example, when the people demanded from Shmuel that there be a king in the book of Samuel. There might have been good parts about it, bad parts about it, but that came from the people, and in the end it happened. Some people have defined Zionism as the right of an indigenous people of Israel to take their fate in their own hands. And if that's true, the kibbutznikim of En-Gev and their neighbors who came and helped them were classic Zionists. Two traditions began in En-Gev that we talked about, and some people even say that going back and getting kind of ancient, there's an ancient Chana, right? There's a Chana in the book of Shmuel who also was a very, very strong woman who changed with her prayers and her teaching of Shmuel, changed the fate of the Jewish people. And it was Chana here also who made a big difference and was inspiring. So it's true that the kibbutz isn't a socialist enterprise anymore, but the tradition is still there. They remember what happened, they're inspired. And this, I think, is a classic example of Jewish continuity. And this is what happens when the Jewish people return to their land. Thank you for joining me. I am still inspired every time I drive by that hill and think, how on earth did they do that? It's incredible. There was no other example of, I mean, there were great acts of bravery in the War of Independence and Land Here to Judge, but no, it didn't happen anywhere else that a kibbutz took a hill on their own and held on to it. Not just a battle to beat the enemy away, but actually to take a place. They changed the border of Israel, and that's an incredible thing. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring for anyone who would say, nah, I can't do it. It's too big for me. I can't do it. After you hear the story, it's hard to not believe in the power of the Jewish people to create their own fate. So I hope you're inspired too. And for those who are interested in the archaeological part of Susita, next week we'll talk a little bit about goats and siphons, and we'll leave it at that. Tov, good evening to everybody. Shavua Tov, Litraot.